Night presses down on Ojuelegba with a sound like a tired drum. Tunde wakes to it, the leather seat cold under his back, a small brass key on a frayed string clutched in his hand like a talisman. A delivery truck groans past, its light sweeping across the windshield and waking the stray dog under the fence. The smell of frying oil and wet earth punches through the glass. A voice comes from the lane, a shout that could be danger or nothing. He hears boots on tin. For one sharp second he pictures glass smashing, his little blue car crushed, the key lost in mud, and then he chooses to pull the lock tighter and breathe through the silence until it passes. He has learned how to sleep with half an eye open. The car is small but kept like a ship, soft scarf over the dash to block wind, a thin foam mattress laid across the back, a canvas bag with clean shirts hung from the headrest. The brass key is his only jewelry, battered and warm from his palm, a thing that used to hang from the door of a house with big kola nut trees. Around the corner, market stalls shout into the morning like cock crows. On nights when rain tastes like metal and smoke mixes with jasmine, he tucks the key under his pillow and listens to the town. People call him Nobody, with a rough fondness, toss him extra bread, pass on a warm cup of tea. He takes everything with the quiet of someone who has practiced being small. He learned to move unseen because the city has a way of grabbing what you build without asking. At first the obstacles are small, like nails in a tire. A landlord tells him his car cannot stay in that lot after dark, then returns with a note that he owes months of parking fees he does not have. A traffic warden pokes a flashlight in his window and asks for papers, the beam cutting through the dark like a needle. Someone smashes his headlight for sport. The second obstacle arrives in the fog of a notice nailed to the market gate: redevelopment, eviction on Monday. The paper trembles in the wind and a child from the alley picks at the glue with a fingernail as if he can unwrite the city. He moves in the morning like a man learning to gather allies. At the tea stall by the barber he meets Amina, a young reporter from the university with a notebook that never leaves her hand. She is neat, hair tied with a bright headscarf, and she watches him with eyes that do not assume him less than anything. "You are always here at dawn?" she says, handing him a cup. He shrugs and keeps the brass key hidden in the corner of his mouth while he drinks. Amina writes strangers' names in a rapid, clear script: vendor, widow, mechanic, car sleeper. She asks questions the way rain asks the roof for answers. He answers lightly, a cracked joke, a small truth, and she listens like someone collecting a map. The city throws at them the second set of problems. Word gets out from Amina's small blog that a car sleeper has refused to move from the market lot slated for demolition. The post slips into larger feeds and starts to taste like scandal. The developer behind the new scheme, Chinedu Nwosu, a man with a double name and a loud laugh, sends men in suits with soft shoes into the lane. They pass out envelopes with pictures, glossy plans of glass towers, a promise of better roads if people will only go away. The third obstacle is not small. A truck with heavy chains rolls into the lot to measure and to mark. It plants flags that wave like small white betrayal. Tunde stands in the rain beside the truck, the brass key cold against his ribs, and votes in his mind whether to speak up or bolt. He speaks. Standing in front of a rusting taxi to use as a platform, he talks with a voice that surprises him, steady, even musical in the way it grabs attention. "They promise gardens, but they mean towers," he says. "They call us numbers. They forget we sleep, we laugh, we bury our dead here." People come close. A child climbs onto the car roof and waves a cloth. Amina writes feverishly, her eyes bright under the umbrella. The developer's men glare and take measurements with polite smirks, as if size will frighten him into silence. But his words gather like bees. The crowd swells into a small, hot tide, and the flags fluttering on the ground seem suddenly petty in the face of human voices. Obstacles stack like roadblocks. The market association's leader, once a friend, takes a letter and signs his name with a hand that shakes. He has been bought, he says, by a nicer offer. A permit arrives from the city, stamped and clean, telling everyone they must leave or face enforcement. The police set up a watch in the square and ask for order with a firm tone. A man with a suit and no smile approaches Tunde one evening and says, "You could be useful inside the meeting," as if words could become a trap. A debt collector shows up from a company Tunde never met, claiming charges for unpaid loans connected to a name he once used. Sleep grows thin, the brass key rattles like a small bell each night when he turns his head. The midpoint comes like thunder and then light. Amina presses a recorder to his chest beneath a faded shirt and asks a simple question. "Who are you, truly?" He laughs and says he is nobody. She clicks the recorder off and says, "I have to write true names." That night he opens the canvas bag he keeps folded under a sweater and pulls out a passport. He has not dared show anyone, a stack of documents stamped with financial seals and a card with a logo he has tried. To forget, Okechukwu Holdings. The brass key slides from his palm and clinks on the floor. He tells Amina the truth in small pieces like bread broken for a child. Once he was Ifeanyi Okechukwu, the son of kola trees, the man whose hands signed loans and whose name was in the news with headlines like "Billionaire Expands." He is not unknown because life forced him into the street. He took the road to see what the street looks and smells like. The meaning of everything flips. The people who called him nobody step back and look at him with a new light. This is the man who could stop the demolition today, the one with papers and power. Amina's eyes go wet so quickly he thinks rain has found her. But his old life is complicated with chains. Okechukwu Holdings is tangled with the new glass towers. His board, made of men who learn to wear smiles like weapons, stands ready to turn the company into a machine of profit that eats whole neighborhoods. If he steps forward, the market might be saved. But his admission could break the fragile trust he has built with his neighbors, who see him now as an actor in a play they did not write. The flip is not clean. It is a hard coin with one rough edge. After the reveal, the city's gears whir faster. His sister shows up at the market with hospital-grade anger and an empty look, telling stories of sleepless boardrooms where men with sleek shoes plan to sell the land pasteurized with plausible lies. The board files papers contesting his status, saying Ifeanyi is unwell, that he has been replaced, or worse, that he has abdicated authority without telling the company. Chinedu Nwosu smirks in interviews and calls the protesters obstacles and the police partners. A court summons slides under the car door like a hot blade. The fourth obstacle is legal, and it smells of ink and lawyers. A board member named Olalakan produces a copy of a will that strips Ifeanyi of signatory power. The crowd watches, the brass key heavier than it was. He tries to use the tools he once had. In a tiny rented room above a tailor shop, he opens an old briefcase and takes out a map of contracts and a file of names. He calls a lawyer who still remembers his voice. He uses old accounts to pull up ledgers that show how the land between the market and the river was parceled into a plan of towers. In the margins, somebody had scribbled "preferred by" near several plots belonging to connected men. Amina breaks a story on live radio. Leaked papers show a pattern. The city council listens because news means trouble. But the fifth obstacle is human ferocity, an arson double, a night when someone sets fire to the little tea stall where the widow sells bread. Mama Kemi is badly burned trying to save her cooking pot. She dies with soot on her face and the brass key clenched in Tunde's hand because he ran there and found himself holding it like an oath. The crisis is a gut in the chest. 6 weeks after showing the passport, his motives are questioned, and his allies are wounded. Akemi's death is heavy and raw, like a drumbeat that will not stop. He sits by her grave under a mango tree and feels the weight of the brass key, like the weight of a promise. If he had not stepped in, could she still be alive? Someone in the crowd calls him a savior, and someone else a fraud. Papers are filled in at the company that might leave the market to be bulldozed in 48 hours. Police tape snaps like a mouth shutting. He must choose in that raw hour, reveal everything now on national television, and use his name to stop the deal, or keep himself small and try to keep the market seen by its own light, risking the auctions and the bulldozers because his silence protects a fragile trust. He chooses to stand open. He walks into the boardroom with a pulse like a cliff. Cameras line the hall. Amina is there with a recorder and a face like carved wood. He tells the board in public who he is and what he has seen. He speaks into microphones with a steady truth that turns the suit collars uneasy. He produces ledgers, signed receipts, and phone records. He names names. The spectacle unfurls on national television. Tunde, no, Ifeanyi Okechukwu, sits at the head of the table in a borrowed shirt with mud on the cuffs, and outside the crowd swells like a sea, people chanting the names of those who have no tall buildings of their own. The minister who rubber-stamped the permits, Honorable Eze, watches from his seat and grows pale as the camera moves in on the stamps and signatures. The unexpected witness arrives in the form of a janitor from the company, a quiet man named Musa who sweeps with a face like folded paper. Under pressure from Amina's questions, Musa brings forward a stack of USB drives he found in a drawer and kept because he didn't want to throw away what looked like trash. He plugs one into a laptop in the boardroom and the screen fills with voice recordings. Meetings where the minister's laugh mixes with the developer's promises, where the chairman counts how much to pay the council member to sign away the people. The room goes so silent the air seems to hold its breath. The recordings are small, human sounds that become evidence, a laugh, a name, a number. Musa's hand shakes as the files play, and when he speaks, his voice is a flute under gunfire. Then the boards crack. The minister leaves the meeting with a face like a man who has swallowed a bitter thing and cannot speak it up. Chinedu and Olalekan both try to push legal papers that bind the sale, but the public eye has already lit up like a bonfire. People from across the city bring their phones, their loud voices, their banners. The multi-climax arrives in a spiral of events. Press vans roll up. The police, that used to look like an arm of silence, are now forced by orders they cannot ignore to place handcuffs on men with polished watches. The chairman's smug smile melts into the blank-faced surprise of a man who thought himself safe. On television, Ifeanyi speaks about the market and about Mama Kemi, and about why he slept in his car to listen. He strips off a tie in full view and hands it to the crowd. An old man takes it and presses it to his chest. The antagonist is stripped of power not with violence but with revealed truth, and with the people's eyes turned toward the ledger of their lives. There is a moment of raw brightness when the city decides what it will be. The court places temporary injunctions on the sale. The minister steps down under inquiry. The developer is suspended from his own board and watched like a man with hot tea at his feet. Ifeanyi uses his name and his money to set aside the purchases of the plots for community housing. He signs papers in public and promises land trusts rather than towers. The market's flags come down and go up with new words. Community trust founded. Projects begin that look like repair and like care. Roofing over stalls, a solar light on the lane, a small clinic in the corner where Mama Kemi used to set her pot. A kind of justice unfolds that feels like mending a torn cloth with strong hands. Not everything heals at once. People who were hurt remain so. The tailor who lent Ifeanyi money when he was small can and be brought back to life, and a young vendor's child grows up without a mother. The town keeps its scars like medals. Ifeanyi learns a new kind of leadership, one that starts with a listening ear and ends with signatures on notebooks full of promises. He spends weeks sleeping again in the car, not because he must, but because he chooses to keep the small door open. He wants to show people he is still with them. The brass key is no longer an object of secrecy, but a token of trust. He paints it gold and hangs it on the new community center door as a quiet joke, the day the center opens with bread and music, and a woman who once called him "nobody laughing so loud the sound could be heard across the market." 6 months slide by with the slow comfort of a river finding a new bed. The towers that were planned sit on hold with scaffolding like halted grammar, while community homes rise in neat, bright rows, designed with input from market people who never before held a pencil to the urban plan. Amina leaves her small blog and starts a city column. Musa, the janitor, becomes a paid archivist for community records, his hands steady now. Ifeanyi sits sometimes at the center's porch, the brass key heavy on his table, and watches children who used to sell beads run around the new garden laughing. He rides a battered bicycle down the lane to once more purchase plantain from the widow's stall, and when the wind gusts, it smells like mango and new paint. People still call him Ifeanyi and sometimes Tunde, and he answers to both because both are true. There is a quiet ritual on the first market anniversary after the saving. They hang lights on the poles and invite everyone to eat together. Ifeanyi stands on a crate and tells a short story of a man who learned to sleep small to listen large. The brass key is small in his palm, and he gives it to a child with holes in his shoes, saying, "Keep this. Remember that keys can lock and open." The child looks at the object and at him with sudden wonder. Cameras are present but kept outside so people can speak without edges. The mood is both celebration and apology because the man who once held power sees how care must be spoken into every place where people sleep. Word moves beyond the city. People from Accra and Nairobi hear the story and send messages. A small group of students from Cape Town write about building community trusts. Ifeanyi starts a small foundation that does not wear suits, but works with market people to buy back land and give technical help instead of empty promises. He sets up a fund that pays school fees for the tailor's children and builds a scholarship in Mama Kemi's name for cooks who want to learn safe ways to keep flames from killing them. He shows up unannounced sometimes, sleeping again in the car as if taking stock, and then he signs the new checks with the same hand he used when he once signed contracts that hurt people. The brass key sits on the table beside new ledgers that are handwritten and stamped by many hands. The story moves toward a hush that is honest and not loud with pride. He does not go back to the life of marble and news banners. He takes only what is needed, and the city, in an odd way, keeps him honest by remembering he once called himself nobody. The board that tried to sell the people's land is replaced by people who count noses as much as profits. Old men who once wore smug smiles are now learning humility in the slow route of public service. Tunde, no, Ifeanyi, sleeps occasionally in the blue car, which is now no longer a refuge, but a choice, a reminder of how close power and poverty can stand to one another without seeing each other's faces. On market mornings, he walks among the stalls, the brass key hanging now from his neck on a frayed string. He touches the handles of doors, the edges of pots, the skin of fruit, as if cataloging a life in small, careful notes. Amina brings him tea and writes again. Musa watches the records like a priest. Children run while the old men argue the merits of new roofs. The city breathes, a furnace that is sometimes cruel and sometimes kind, and the story becomes one more in its mouth. Yet every time the wind comes off the river, Tunde feels the old risk like a hand on his neck, a memory of the night he chose to stay in the car. He thinks of the brass key and the small choice that began the long days. 6 months later, the community center opens with a ribbon and the smell of kola nut and cassava. The children run to the library where Amina has donated books, and the tailor's children sit under a tree with painted chairs. The brass key shines on the center door, not ostentatious but bright, a promise worn like a mark on the palm. Ifeanyi stands with a simple cup of tea and watches as people move through the new rooms, their shadows long and content. He thinks of Mama Kemi and the way she used to hum as she stirred her pot, and he knows the work will be long. Yet something in the lane has changed. People who were once nameless now have a small house number, a clean light, a voice in the council. True power chooses to serve. You believe people can truly change? If this moved you, leave a kind word below and share the tale with someone who needs a lift today. A chrome envelope lands on the market stall as dawn spills copper over zinc roofs, and a courier's footstep sounds louder than the hawker's cries, and inside the envelope sits a single line taped to a card. A charter of a new community trust funded by Adeobi Nwosu, a billionaire whose name most people only whispered about in markets and in the shadows of the glass towers, promising to buy the remaining plots for long-term housing and to guard the riverbank against any future scheme. And the message ends with a calendar date and a location for a public meeting where Ifeanyi's name is not just spoken, but measured against a ledger that glows under fluorescent bulbs. The interval beat arrives like a drum after a pause, and in those first few breaths the market stirs with a breath I have never heard here before, a mix of relief and caution, and Ifeanyi feels the brass key warm against his chest, as if it remembers the old nights when a quiet choice could tilt a future, and the questions come at him fast. Will this be enough to keep the towers at bay? And who is Adeobi really? And what price will the city pay to get this trust in place before the next council meeting? The post-interval pressure is immediate and personal. Adeobi herself arrives with a small convoy that respects neither ego nor rumor, but carries with it the hush of serious money and a face that looks through you into the thing you fear most, the idea that power can be owned by a few who pretend to be generous to the many. She steps onto the market platform with Ifeanyi by her side, the brass key hanging on a frayed string around his neck, now a visible symbol of both his history and his current mandate. And she speaks in a calm voice that carries across the stalls and into the tea shop where Amina hovers with her recorder, and she says that the trust will fund a land rights program, a housing cooperative for indoors who sleep in their cars in the lot, a clinic on the edge of the river, and a scholarship for cooks who learn to feed neighborhoods before money learned to count them. She acknowledges Mama Kemi's memory and nods to Mama Kemi's daughter, who has never forgiven the city for a night of smoke and fear. And the crowd buys the words but wants the deeds to begin now, not in a boardroom where suits speak of long horizons and never names. Ifeanyi raises the key to his lips and tastes the old metal, and for a moment the air feels softer, as if the river itself exhaled. The first major obstacle after the interval is not a chain or a permit, but a question of tempo. The board's old guard, the men who learn to count lives in ledgers instead of breaths in the market, watch Adeobi with wary eyes, and Olalekan, who once signed off on a deal that would have turned the lane into a corridor for glass, leans toward the door as if ready to bolt, while Chinedu mutters a half-lunny praise to the power of a name that can turn into a signature in a single stroke. The crowd's mood swings between hope and fear, and Ifeanyi feels the weight of the brass key like a damp coin dropped into a wooden box, the kind of weight that asks for a choice. Speak loudly and risk angering people who can't afford to be cynical, or speak softly and risk betraying those who have taught him that quietness can be a weapon as deadly as a shout. Then Musa, the janitor with the folded papers in his pocket, slides a USB drive across the marble tabletop during a corridor meeting, and the room freezes as Amina plugs it into a laptop, and the screen blooms with voices from meetings, where ministers' laughs are tied to developers' promises, and a council member's signature glints like a blade. The recordings reveal payments and side letters and a quiet, creeping plan to reroute the trust's money away from the riverbank and toward a parking lot where a luxury condo would gleam with the promise of jobs that are local, but only in the way a mirage is local to the thirsty. The room tightens around the truth like a clamp, and Ifeanyi's resolve fixes into a line as tight as the key's own notch, and he asks the crowd to listen to the words of the recordings as if they are rain asking a roof to bear its weight. Midway through this storm of sound and oath, a second turning point arrives with the force of a gust that rattles the tarpaulins and lifts a banner just enough to show a second bay. Enter behind it, a banner that carries Adeobi's logo and a second motto: "We build, we guard, we share." The reveal comes through Adeobi's assistant, who steps forward with a flat envelope that contains a formal letter confirming Adeobi's pledge to fund the land buyback and to set up a transparent governance structure that includes vendor representatives. The audience shifts. Eyes that once followed the board's smugness now drift toward Adeobi with a mix of astonishment and relief, and a memory surfaces in Ifeanyi's chest. The memory of Mama Kemi humming as she stirred her pot, the way her pot's lid clapped a rhythm to quiet mornings, and he wonders if in this moment his own voice could become a bell that rings for more than one neighborhood. But the turn is not only about money, it's about governance. Adeobi proposes a temporary council with equal seats for market elders, the widows, the car-sleeping vendors, and the young journalists who chronicled the fight. She suggests a quarterly public audit of all funds, and she names a trusted independent auditor from Lagos who will fly in every 3 months to ensure the books stay clean. The crowd murmurs approval, and then approval turns to jubilation, then to a cautious cheer that sounds like a single breath held for a long time. Yet, even as the room moves toward a visible win, Ifeanyi senses the undercurrent. A third pressure, not legal and not financial, but moral. Will this wealth, poured into the lane, hollow out the people's sense of their own power, or will it truly belong to them in such a way that the next generation can sleep with the confidence that the city woke up to them first? The third pivot arrives with a whisper and a shadow. Amina's microphone catches a note from a figure in the back, somebody who has never spoken in public, someone who knows the city's bones better than any boardroom slide. It is Mama Kemi's granddaughter, who survived the hospital blaze by clinging to a pot handle and who now speaks in a voice that shakes the room with both grief and a stubborn belief in comeback. The legacy of the lane is not just food and shade and a place to sleep. It is a promise that when money comes, it does not come to erase your face, but to reskin the streets with something kinder. She asks for a seat at the governance table and a voice in the budget where repairs on the teetering market awnings will be funded with a fairness that recognizes the people's scars and their right to shape the future. The board's old smiles fade into something uneasy as Adeobi turns to Ifeanyi and says softly, "You chose to be seen. Now choose to be answerable." And he answers by stepping toward the crowd, lifting the brass key from his chest and laying it in the palm of a vendor matriarch who has held the lane together with coffee and patient hands, a gesture that makes the room go quiet as a night market before rain. The resolution of this interval begins to take shape in a way that feels almost inevitable. The sale is stopped, not by force, but by a larger force. The community's own will filtered through a new open governance, with Adeobi as a quiet patron who insists on accountability rather than control. The tower plans are shelved, not forgotten but paused, and the riverbank, not a line on a map but a living thing, receives a plan for restoration that comes with real money, with a timeline that the vendors' grandchildren can see, and with a pledge that any future development must have the consent of the market's own council. Ifeanyi stands in the center of the mound. Arcot, on the day Adeobi's charter is announced, the brass key resting against his chest like a storm that has learned to slow, and he speaks not as a savior but as a steward. We did not win with a single voice. We won because many voices learned to sing together. The line between nobody and somebody has blurred into a new, gentler truth, that power, when held with care, does not roar, but hums like a well-tuned generator, keeping the lights on and the bread warm, even when the night is long. The crowd, who once wore fear as a second skin, now wears relief as a second skin, and passes it along with bread and tea and the shared smell of cola nuts. The last beat of this interval is a quiet one. If someone asks what changed, Ifeanyi's answer is simple and straight, the brass key dangling in the light, and he says, "The city changed when we chose to tell the truth in front of the cameras," and in the same breath he turns to the new community council, the journalists, the widows, the cooks, the students, and says, "We begin again, together, with trust as our mark and care as our currency." The screen fades to the market's first dawn after the decision, and a figure steps into the light from the shadows, a silhouette that could be a Diobe or could be someone else. And the crowd gasps, and the interval ends with a breath of suspense, a promise that the next scene will reveal who truly guides this trust, who still bears the weight of the key, and what price the city will pay to keep the wind from changing direction again. The conflict has shifted from a fight for land to a fight for accountability. And while the towers remain a rumor in a drawer, the lanes glow with a new kind of streetlight, the kind that comes when wealth eye to eye with the people finally agrees to stay. The next chapter waits with a dignified pause, and the brass key, now more symbol than tool, hangs at Ifeanyi's knee as a quiet, stubborn reminder. True power chooses to serve, but it must be chosen every morning by those who will not forget the faces that slept in the dark.